Well, hi and welcome to Coffee with Phil. Welcome to this podcast where we drink coffee. And in this series, this limited series, I'm speaking about transition, about the journey from there to over there, from where you are to where God is leading you. In this series of 8 episodes, we're going to talk about transition, sensing the new thing, seeing the new thing, how to manage fear, definitely want to stop opening closed doors, and the art of waiting well. Join me on this journey as we drink coffee and talk about transition. Well, good afternoon. Welcome to Coffee with Phil. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome to my studio. And welcome to the space where I drink coffee and tell you all about it. And look, friends, I know this is going to concern a lot of you. I know you're worried for me. I know, you think I've got challenges, and I do. Last week's coffee drama. Oh, wow. Look, if you're not praying for me, you need to be praying for me because, wow. Last week, I'm in the office, and I'm out there looking to make coffee for some folks, and, you get everything ready, and then you grind the coffee. Well, most of you know, well, that's what happens. But then can you imagine what it's like when you push the button to get the coffee working in the grinder and it goes whir, 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 and then stops. And you're like, oh, that's really strange. Why would it do that? And so you check it, you got your beans, you got everything open, it's ready to flow, and you push the button and it goes roar, and stops. And look, I don't know, if you don't know coffee, then I'm just going to tell you that's a bad thing. It's not going to generate the ground coffee that is sufficient for making an espresso. And so I'm like, oh my gosh. And the equipment that we've got in the office is good. It's top quality and not that old. When we reset our building, new location a couple of years ago, coffee is part of our culture, family gathering, doing stuff well, and so we'd kind of we had a really good setup, and I'm like, this is a new grinder, why is it not working? And then I'm like, okay, so if you've seen a picture of a grinder or a grinder, there's a hopper on the top of it, and you can take that hopper off normally to clean it, but also to access the top of the grinder where there is a couple of they're called burrs, but they're like a disc with big teeth on them, and the teeth face each other, and as they spin in opposite directions, they kind of grind the coffee. Well, I couldn't even get that. I couldn't even lift the hopper off, and I'm like, how do I get in here? And, my little grinder I've got at home, which is nowhere near as complicated, I can take the top off, I can pull the middle bit out, and I can clean it and brush it and make sure it's all good. And this is really important. This is a lesson for those of you that do make a little bit of coffee. That is to clean your grinder. Clean your grinder every 3 months, because if you've also, you're watching coffee and you're pouring your coffee shot, and if you're doing it properly, and if the beans are good and the pressure is right and the tamping is good and the pour is good, then you're going to get what's called the crema on top of your espresso shot, and it's kind of that light-coloured, oily surface that is on the shot of a coffee. And if you don't know what that's like, just go and look on YouTube or Google, it'll find it for you. Well, that crema is created by the oils that are extracted out of the coffee bean, which is why it's really important to clean your grinder, because if you don't clean your grinder, the oil creates build-up. And so I'm now thinking, have we cleaned this grinder? This is the one at the office now, the one that's not going, the one and I can't make coffee, which is a crisis, in my world. Anyway, it was so complicated. I couldn't even get the hopper off, and then I finally managed to work out that if you twist it and have someone hold the machine and you kind of wriggle it, it sort of slowly works its way. It's quite a new machine, obviously doesn't get taken out, it's quite tight, and whoosh, all of a sudden it releases the pressure, and within 10 seconds I've got coffee beans all over the foyer of our office, everywhere, spread 5 meters, which of course is hysterical for those watching. And I just had to stand there and go, well, that was a bad thing that I did there. But then, even worse, I couldn't get into the top of it. I'm like, how do I even open this? So anyway, I had to get help. I had to go and get professional help, to be honest. But the reason I tell you that story is obviously coffee is a drug, and coffee creates an addiction. And so those of us that like to drink good coffee might confess or be willing to accept that there is a bit of an addiction there that demands attention. And this is really, I suppose, the introduction to the concept of today's podcast, episode 107, where we're talking about the art of learning to wait well. The art of learning to wait well. And, if you've got an addiction that demands attention, then you're not going to wait that well. You're going to be impatient. So like in the morning, if you're got a little bit of shake on because you're craving coffee and the coffee machine's not able to satisfy that craving, then you're not going to wait that well. But let me give you a parallel, friends, because instant gratification is an addiction that will mean you cannot wait well because you have trained yourself into a place of weakness where you must have instant gratification or short-term answers to your problems. And so you might mock me for my addiction to coffee that demands attention. That means I can't wait well for the coffee to be provided. But for those of you that cannot wait well, I would say to you, your addiction is worse, actually, because you've got an addiction to instant gratification, and the Lord often does not work in a short timeline. And so this is why this podcast is really quite important, why we've put it into the series on transition, because transition is about going from one place to another. It's about going on a journey with the Lord, and you don't get to determine the time frame. There's one thing that I'm certain of, is that God has got us in a passage of transition. As a church, and by that I mean the people, as the people of God, we're on a journey. I've given you examples about the exodus from Egypt to the promised land. I've given you other examples about Abraham and Ishmael. So you can look that up yourself or look at the previous podcast. In episode 106, I said to you, a lack of patience is a lack of trust and therefore a lack of faith. You might want to contemplate that one for a little while. So let's talk today about some instances. I've got a story to tell you about a song. I've got a journey I want to take you on. Let's talk about the art of waiting well. And friends, I'm afraid to tell you, you're going to have to learn to wait well. And so I want to get into that. This is how I want to approach this episode. What I want to do at the beginning here is I'm going to say to you, well, what is not waiting well? Let's look at some examples. And before you think I'm going to tell your story, don't worry. I'm not going to confess your sins here. And in fact, I'm not even going to confess mine. But we are going to understand what it means to not wait well. What does it look like? What's the fruit of rushing in with instant gratification? What are we serving? And hopefully it's obvious that that would be a mistake, well, based on the fruit of the outcomes. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you 3 Bible stories. And I got to tell you, I just love this podcast, but the preparation for the podcast, because as I sit here, as I drive in my car, as I'm thinking about you guys, and we're all going on a journey together, I find this wonderful experience of the Lord taking me into this place of revelation. And I do my little mind map on a piece of recycled paper, and, I dig it out of a box, and I take a pen, and I just scratch out these thoughts, and I just love the way God leads me on this journey. And it's true, I am trying to use the Word of God as a standard. What I'm not trying to do is to preach sermons at you in every episode. But I have to confess that I've made a decision that my life is going to be based on the Bible as the standard of truth by which I should aspire to learn from. And so I just can't help myself in giving biblical examples. So please, hopefully you hear enough of me in this to know that it's a personal podcast, because the Lord has challenged me to make sure I'm sharing my life as part of the experience of the podcast. But again, I'm like in my life, I'm always going back to the Bible, back to the text and saying, God, what can you teach me? So that's what I share with you. And no worries, you can thank me later. You are welcome. What is not waiting well? Well, last time I talked to you about Abraham and the promises God gave Abraham, and I talked to you I gave you a reference of Genesis 16, and because it was fresh in my mind, it's kind of the first one that came on my list, but it's a classic example of not waiting well. And so if you want to read the story, go and look it up in Genesis chapter 16. Abraham and his wife Sarai, they have a promise that God is going to give them a son, and they're old, man. Like, they're 75. Well, Abraham is 75. We think Sarai's a bit younger, but about the same age, and her womb is barren, dry as a stick, you could say. And they're not getting the son. Like, you got to assume that they're trying. That's a picture you don't want to have in your mind for too long. But Abraham and Sarai are trying to have a son. And it's just not working in the flesh. The natural process is not working. And so Sarai says, well, take my maidservant Hagar and marry her. And Abram goes, oh, well, we'll give that a go. And sure enough, they have a son, and his name is Ishmael. So it's commonly known in church circles, for those that have read the Bible, to often warn their friends and say, hey, friend, you want to learn to wait well, because you don't want an Ishmael. And what that says is, don't take things into your own hands. Wait on God, for those things he has promised, he is able and faithful to complete in his good time by his good strength. So the first one is Abraham, Sarai, and Hagar. It's an example of not waiting well, and certainly the Lord wasn't happy with the process they went through. The second example, I love this scripture. It's in 1 Samuel chapter 15. It's the story of Saul and the bleating sheep. And so Saul is the king of Israel, and he's told by the prophet to go and destroy the Amalekites. Wipe them from the face of the earth, because their sin has fulfilled its purpose, says God, and I want them destroyed. And the prophet says, destroy everything. But what Saul does is he goes in there and he kills all the guys except the king. He brings him back to kind of, it's like an ego thing. I'm going to parade him in front of the people. I'm going to look like I'm the guy. And then I might, kill him in some kind of public spectacle. And then he goes, well, actually, while I'm here, I may as well take the sheep back to the house, because they're pretty fine looking sheep. And perhaps I'll make an offering. But he doesn't destroy them. And so the context of my statement, Saul and the bleating sheep, is that when Samuel the prophet, the man of God, turns up to Saul's house, and Saul's like super proud of himself. He's like, hey, look, I took the Amalekites and I destroyed them like you said. And he's like happy, he's like, man, come on, give me a pat on the back. And Samuel's like, well, if that's the case, what is this bleating of sheep that comes to my ears? And it's a rebuke. It's a harsh correction. He's saying, no. You didn't do what God asked you to do. And so that's in 1 Samuel 15. You can read around about that to find the story for yourself. The third example is Samson. Anyone know about Samson? The big guy, the strong man. He's a judge of Israel, and you can read his story in Judges 15 and 16. I'm specifically talking about Delilah. So Samson pursues Delilah. What a beautiful name, Delilah. Imagine if your name was Delilah. Sorry, I'm sounding like an Indian commentator now, but in Judges chapter 16, I'm just thinking of a cricket commentator. Oh, there's Delilah. Hey, making a good shot for the 4 runs. Sorry, I don't know what's going on here. Or maybe I've had too much coffee. Anyway, sorry, focus, man, focus. Samson pursues Delilah. and it does not end well for Samson. And so he's not waiting on God, essentially, is the point of that story. And so these three examples, I've kind of got three weaknesses that we being me and you, we tend to make mistakes. So you might not have a Hagar, you might not forget to kill the king or the sheep, and you might not pursue Delilah. But flesh is flesh, weakness is weakness. So in the situation of Abraham, I would say that Abraham decided to trust in strength, not silence. So he was trusting in the strength of himself instead of waiting in the silence of Sarah's barrenness. And, sometimes I've been quoted as joking and saying, well, the Lord was a bit slow, so I decided to help him. And that is me trusting in my strength and not God's silence, because you must remember God's silence always has purpose. So Abraham, Sarai, one of the mistakes they show us in ourselves as we hold their story up as a mirror to reflect and look at our own character. Sometimes when we don't wait well, it's because we trust in our strength and not in the silence of God that's doing its purpose. In the second story where I spoke about Saul and Samuel hearing the cry of the bleating sheep that comes to his ears, you know what the weakness is there? We make an assumption instead of being obedient. Saul had assumed and then presumed that he was doing the right thing because it was good in his mind. Well, it felt right. Well, what part of obedience is dependent on you feeling right? None, friend. Absolutely none. And so Saul's big mistake was he moved an assumption, and he moved out of step with the will or the instructions of God and was therefore disobedient. He didn't wait. Had he waited well, then we would see a very, very different outcome. There's another story about Saul. I don't have the reference in front of me, but he was told to wait. This is prior to this. He was told to wait for Samuel to arrive. I think it's about 1 Samuel, maybe 13. He was told to wait well, and he never did. He decided he was going to get on because Samuel was taking his time. It took him a while to walk there, and he just went on with the sacrifice and was doing it all himself. And so his assumption or presumption was not obedience. And I've got to say, sometimes I have decided to interpret what God meant based on my perspective, my mindset, and my knowledge. And that's never obedience. We got to go with what God says and trust that what he says is going to play course. Okay, so that's the second one. And then with Samson pursuing Delilah, quite simply, that is, if I hold that up and have it as a mirror in the weakness of my character, I would say that's about satisfying flesh, not faith. And go and read the story of Samson. It's kind of makings of a good Netflix series, because Samson's got let's just say he's got an appetite for women, and he pursues them and takes what he wants, and doesn't seem to have a lot of decorum about how he does it, and he's pretty strong-willed in what he gets. And Delilah's not the first one in his story, by the way, if I could just say that, but he's very obviously satisfying his flesh and not his faith in God. He's not waiting on God, he's not asking God, he's not following God's instructions, he's satisfying the flesh. How many times have we, you, me, how many times have we decided to satisfy our flesh or our cravings or our addiction to instant gratification instead of waiting in faith? And I'm feeling the conviction of the Holy Spirit right now. I don't know about you, but I'm just about to go and have a little repentance session in prayer shortly. I read something online recently, and the guy was writing about waiting, and he said, and this is an American, so if you've ever driven in America, which you will do if you're listening to this from America, but in America they have a sign at an intersection, and it says yield. And what that means is well, in our language in New Zealand, Australia, we have a sign that says give way. It kind of means the same thing. When you come to a sign that says yield, you must allow those to go before you that have the right of way. But it doesn't necessarily mean stop and be stationary, because that's a different sign. That's a stop sign. You know, we have a place here. We have yellow lines painted on the road and a red sign on the side of the road, and it says stop. And if you see a stop sign, you actually have to come to a stop before you move on. But a give way sign or a yield sign does not demand that you stop, but that you pause and give right of way to those who need it. And this is what waiting on God is like. God doesn't always say, sit in the closet and be still until I turn up. Well, I mean, he might. But what he's saying is, on your journey, yield, give way to those things that I have prepared for you. And I just give you that as a little bit of free bonus before we move on. Okay, I'm wanting to share a story with you, and it is about waiting well, and it is about a time when I needed to wait well, and so there was this time I was in where was I? I was in America, and I was in this season of like, man, what's going on in my life, and who am I, and where am I, and what's next. And I literally, I've told you guys these stories before. I was literally every morning I'd be up and I'd have my quiet time and I'd read the Bible and I'd journal and I'd be like, God, who am I? What's going on? And the Lord was really gracious, and he took me through a season, and he just unpacked and a whole bunch of stuff, and we dealt with it as we needed to. But I was waiting. And at the time, there was this movie that came out. The movie is called Fireproof. Yeah, we'll put a link for you in the show notes. And in that movie, there was a song written by a guy called John Waller, and it was called While I'm Waiting. Again, we'll put the link in the show notes. You can listen, watch it, or read the lyrics. But I'm listening to this song, and I think I've got an iPod in those days. How old is that, man? You remember iPods? That's amazing, eh? Little iPods. So after the Walkman, but before the iPhone, smartphone. I've got my iPod and I've got my earbuds in, and of course it's plugged in, so I've got to have it close to me because there's no Bluetooth. And I'm listening to the song while I'm in the gym, and I'm working out in the gym, and I'm pushing weights, and I'm worshiping with this song. And the lyrics open, it says, I'm waiting on you, Lord. And I'm hopeful. I'm waiting on you, Lord. Though it is painful, but patiently I will wait. This is the kind of demeanor about learning to wait well. And man, I was in limbo, and I'm waiting. And then the next line of the song says, and I will move ahead, bold and confident, taking every step in obedience. And then it gets into like this little chorus. And the song goes like this: while I'm waiting, I will serve you. While I'm waiting, I will worship. While I'm waiting, I will not faint. I'll be running the race even while I wait. And that's really what I wanted to draw you into, was the context of these lyrics that were teaching me as I'm using them as a song, almost like, I've got that saying, prayers, songs are prayers on our lips, right? So as we sing the song, as we listen to the song, as we meditate on the song, we're offering it back to the Lord as a prayer. Well, that's how I do it, right? So I'm in the gym and I'm on the bench and I'm pushing the weights, and I've got these earbuds in my ear and I'm saying, look, Lord, while I'm waiting, I will serve you. While I'm waiting, I will worship. While I'm waiting, I will not faint. I'll be running the race even while I wait. I'm peaceful. I'm waiting on you, Lord, though it's not easy, no, but faithfully I will wait. Yes, Lord, I will wait. And so I'm praying this song and I'm saying, Lord, I'm going to serve you while I'm waiting. And then I'm like, I'm in a gym. I'm in a community gym. Like, how am I going to serve God here? I don't know anybody. I live in Florida. I'm just some random guy. And I look up as I finish my set and I put the bar back on the rack, and I'm sitting there and having a drink, and I look at the wall and it says, want to serve the Lord, ? And I was like, well, that's a quick answer. And underneath it was an advertisement to volunteer in the kitchen, the community kitchen in the church/community center. And I felt the Lord say, well, you want to serve while you're waiting? Here's your chance. And so I pursued that inquiry, and the short version of the story goes that I worked there for 3 months with the chef, and just as a kitchen hand, dishy, whatever needed doing, I'm down there, I'm doing it. And while I was waiting, I was willing to serve. While I was waiting, I was willing to worship Him by giving myself as an offering. And I would sustain myself with strength and confident hope that God was preparing something while I was waiting. And that song, and again, I encourage you to go and listen to it, because it really was ministering to me in that season. Because I didn't have a clue the timeline I was on. I didn't have a clue the destination I was moving towards. I didn't know at all. And I would say this to you, that to learn to wait well, you have to be put in a position where your limits are tested and then extended. I'm going to say that again for you. To learn to wait well, you have to be put in a position where your limits are tested and then extended. And I will say to you that God often leads us on a detour to put us in that position where we don't think we can handle it, we don't know where we are, we're out of our control, we're beyond our strength, and our limits are tested. And God says, come on, my strength is made perfect in your weakness. And as you turn your weakness over to Him as an offering, He will bring His strength and extend your limits as part of His growth work in your life. So that's the good news. The good news is God is doing something, and if you will submit to Him, that's why I use the story of the yield sign. You must yield, give way to the purposes of God, yield to God, and He will lift you up. So now I want to talk to you about probably one of my most favorite guys out of the Bible, apart from Jesus, of course, and the Holy Spirit, and a bunch of others, but King David. David is my guy. Man, I just love the story of David. Well, I love the story of Joseph. He had to wait well, didn't he, in the prison for who knows how long. I think it was 13 years between his dream and his promotion. And King David, possibly the same, possibly even longer. So if you want to go and read the story of King David, it starts in 1 Samuel 16. And it's a good read, and it goes on for some time into 2 Samuel. Not all of David's story is positive, and maybe that's why I can relate to him, because, man, he had some clangers of mistakes. He really failed in a few areas, and yet he was named as a man who had a heart after God's own heart. So David can teach us a lot. And so the heading I've got on my scratching of notes here is King David, not yet king. How's that for a heading? King David, not yet king. So let me just give it to you. Here's the story of King David, not yet king. He is anointed by Samuel, who is the prophet, who is the man of God. And Samuel has anointed Saul, and we already spoke about Saul and the bleating sheep and the several mistakes that King Saul made for various reasons. And I have shared that in many podcasts before. You can go and just search my podcast channel for Saul, and you'll find it in the notes, and you'll find the episodes. So Saul was an egg, basically, and he made so many mistakes. God says, I regret making Saul king. I have found another, a man whose heart is like mine. Go and anoint. Go to the house of Jesse, he says to Samuel, and I will show you the one whom you will anoint. Now, we know David is the youngest of 8 children, 8 sons it is, in fact. He's the youngest of 8 sons. His age, we don't know. Like, he's a young, I would suggest to you, he's a young teen. And he's despised by his family. We know that from his story. You've just got to read the way that his brothers speak to him, and you understand that, man, they hated this guy. And in fact, in the eyes of his father, he was an outcast. And we know that also because when Samuel turns up And they're like, I mean, seriously, if the man of God turns up your house, you either got to be super worried or do everything you can so you don't have to be worried. And so he turns up to Jesse house and he prepares a meal and they're going to sacrifice and before the Lord. And God's very clear to the prophet. He says, look, this man in front of you is not the guy. Like, he's tall and he's strong. This is Eliab, the firstborn of Jesse. And God says, man looks at an outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart, and he rejects the firstborn. And in fact, he rejects all 7. And that's a bit awkward, right? And then we know, he says to Jesse, well, do you have any more boys? Any more sons? And Jesse says, oh, the youngest, but he's out in the field tending to the sheep. See, he was cast out by his father to the fields because he wasn't deemed worthy to be in the room. So we know he was young, we know he was despised, and we know he was an outcast. And yet God anoints him as a future king. And the prophet looks at this young boy, ruddy and handsome as he comes in, and God says, this is the one. Anoint him, pour the oil of the presence of the Lord over him, and anoint him, consecrate him, set him apart as a future king of my people. I mean, this is outstanding. Like, that's only the beginning of the story. And like the significance of this moment. And oh man, I wish I was in the room. But nothing happens. So he's anointed as the king. He's given the blessing of God. He's set apart, and nothing happens. And he goes back to the sheep. That's it. He goes back to the sheep. And he's still young. He's still despised by his brothers, because if you read the story of Goliath, which is in the next chapter, chapter 17 of 1 Samuel, you'll see that his brothers, man, they sass him. They talk him down, man. They cut him with their words. So he's still young, still despised, and he's still an outcast. And then one day his dad says to him, take the bread and the cheese and go and visit your brothers who are in the army because they're standing on the hill and they're afraid. So David visits, and the short, I don't want to get into too long-winded here, but he fights Goliath. I mean, you've probably heard that about David, right? He fights Goliath, and he kills Goliath. And so he gets on the radar, and he also earns the reward for killing Goliath, which is the king's daughter. Lucky him, he's tax-free, tax exemption, and he gets the girl. And that, if that was the end of the story, that would kind of be Netflix going, man, we're done. What a great season that was. It's not even the end of the story. Then you will read that Saul starts to have troubles, emotional and spiritual troubles that God sends his way. And would you believe it? David, the young David, who's despised and outcast, he becomes the preferred musician to bring peace into the house of Saul. It's amazing. He's got this grace and this anointing. He's like the worship leader. He's like ding, 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 and he sings songs, and Saul's anxiety disappears, which is awesome. And if that was the end of the story, that would be good. But he's still not king. So he's in the house of the king, but he's playing music for the king like a servant boy. And then Saul starts to get really upset about it, and a whole lot of things, because the people quite like David. I mean, David's the guy that killed Goliath, right? And so Saul gets jealous, and he tries to kill David. He throws his spear at him to try and kill him. And so David fears for his life and runs for his life. So don't miss the point. He's anointed to be king, and yet the king's trying to kill him. And so he has to run away from the palace where he's supposed to be king. And he hides because he's fearing for his life. And then what happens? I mean, I don't know if you've read the story, but it's really exciting. Then what happens is he hides as a fugitive. And he's got all the rejects that turn up, all the men that kind of get cast out of society because they're, they're not wanted. And the sort of ragamuffins and ragabonds. And he's hiding in caves, and he's kind of living out there, and Saul is chasing him down. So it's not like he's just living in the wilderness. He's got to run for his life. He's got to hide in the wilderness. He's got to try and, preserve himself, because he's got the promise of God on him. He's not going to give up. He's going, oh, well, if it will be, it will be, and I'll just lie down here and let the king kill me. Well, I think the Lord would have been disappointed if that had happened, because he's like, dude, I gave you a promise. Why are you not fighting for it? And so he hides. But here's where I want to get to the key. This is the key in learning to wait well. I'm wrapping this up so that you know where we're heading here, guys. Come on, focus on this. 1 Samuel 24. We get to this point. 1 Samuel 24. Where's my Bible? Here's my Bible. Click, click, click. 1 Samuel 24. And no, we're not got no Bible. What's going on here? I don't know what's happening. 1 Samuel 24 and verse 16, right? This is the real funny part of the story. This is where Netflix would really pick it up again in season number 2 or 3. Because Saul is in the cave and he's doing number 2s. You know what that is, eh? And he's doing number 2s in the cave. And he's relieving himself. So he takes off his cloak. Because, they wear these big long gowns, and he takes off his cloak and all his turban and all his stuff for riding in the desert, and he's doing number 2s. And that's usually quite a private thing, right? But David and his men are hiding in the back of the cave in the shadows. And his men say to him, well, you got to read this, man. It's the 1 Samuel 24. You got to go read the story. And his guys are like, David, this is it. The Lord has given him into your hands, and you shall destroy him. And David, I just love what David does, man. He's like, no, I will not lay my hand on the Lord's anointed. Man, this is today. I'm just giving you this as the key to David's story. I will not lay my hand on the Lord's anointed. And it's that honoring of God. It's the honoring of God that I think is what set David apart. And if that was the end of the story, it would still be cool, right? But it's not. Because then in 1 Samuel 26, Saul and his men are camped in the valley, and David, he's like this night owl, and he's kind of like, oh, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go and I'm going to find something in the valley. And so David goes down there in the middle of the night, and the men are all sleeping in a circle, and Saul is sleeping in the middle of the circle. And so David and his dude Abishai, they come into the circle. And Abishai's like, David, this is your moment. God has delivered your enemy again into your hands. Now let me drive the spear into him. Because remember, David said before, I'm not going to lay my hand on him. And so Abishai goes, well, if you won't do it, this time I'm prepared to do it. I will kill him with one swift jab. And David says to Abishai, do not kill him. Who can extend his hand against the Lord's chosen one, the anointed of the Lord, and remain without guilt? As surely as the Lord lives, the Lord himself will move and strike him down. But may the Lord prevent me from being the one to extend my hand. And so what they did is they just stole his spear and they stole his water as kind of a way to prove that they were there. And then later they call out. Anyway, read the story for yourself. It's in 1 Samuel 26. But what I'm saying to you is this, that this is the key to David learning to wait well. And I want to take you back to the lyrics of that song that I gave you earlier. While I'm Waiting by John Waller. He says, while I'm waiting, I will serve you. While I'm waiting, I will worship. So what's David doing? He's playing the ding-a-ling-ling-ling. He's playing the guitar or the whatever he's playing in the house of Saul and ministering to him. He's serving God's people. And then he says, well, I'll worship. And so what he says, what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to kill God's anointed. And in fact, it's the fear of God that stops him from doing that. It's a really, really significant point, friends. And then the final part of that song I want to get to is when he says, I will not faint. So in the song, John Waller, in the song, he says, I will serve you while I'm waiting. I will worship while I'm waiting. I will not faint while I'm waiting. And I want to talk to you about that because that's the close of David's story that's going to rock your socks. Well, sorry about that little interlude. You didn't have an interlude, but I did because the maid turned up. She got home, and so I just need to make sure she had good instructions for what she's to do in the preparation of my dinner. Of course, you know how that went. Anyway, I just want to finish the podcast in this next few minutes by talking to you about this concept of David, I will not faint. And go and read the story because it's amazing through David's story, first thing, we see David rejected by his own family. His dad and his brothers, he was a despised and outcast. Secondly, he was rejected by Saul. He was pursued by Saul and chased into hiding. Thirdly, he was actually rejected by the Philistines. So he's trying to go and find a safe place to live, and he goes into the enemy camp and he says, look, like, I'm the guy that killed Goliath, your guy Goliath that is, but I'm just here to hide, so I'm on your team. Like, I'm on your team because Saul doesn't want me. And they rejected him. And I think that was a good idea, because otherwise he probably would have caused trouble. But they rejected. So he's rejected by his family, rejected by Saul. He's rejected by the Philistines. And then all the women and the animals get stolen from their camp. The wives and the girls and the maids and the children and the animals, they get stolen. And it says in the Bible, his men wanted to kill him. It's in 1 Samuel 30. And so, like, I just want to point out that if you're going to go through transition and you're going to learn to wait well, rejection might be one of the lessons. And that's going to go down like a warm rat sandwich for all of us that are hearing that. But the truth is, rejection and learning how to handle rejection is part of the journey of learning to wait well. And Pastor Bill Johnson has a wonderful book out of that story of David, because it says in the text in 1 Samuel 30 that it says David strengthened himself in the Lord. And that was very, very powerful for me when I read it. And in fact, on our YouTube channel somewhere, there is a video series that I recorded on the same thing, on how to strengthen yourself in the Lord. So perhaps we'll put that in the show notes as well. That would be well worth you having a look at that as content. And in fact, it might even be somewhere on the podcast. So look, here's the point. David had to learn to wait well. And in that, David had to struggle with rejection. He had to learn how to serve God, and then he had to learn how to worship God, and then he had to learn how to wait and strengthen himself. I would say to you that then David became the king of Judah. So in those days, there were two kingdoms of God's people, Judah, from the tribe of Judah, and then the rest of Israel. And so it says in, I think it's 2 Samuel, about chapter 5, that the leaders of Judah came to David and they said, we want to anoint you as king. We want to appoint you as our king. And he's age 30. And so he becomes the king. But it's not the fulfillment of the promise. I want to make that point very, very clear to you as well. Not the fulfillment of the fullness of the promise, because God had anointed him to be king over all of God's people. And do you know what? It was another 7 years. Approximate time frame. David was then appointed to be the king of Israel at age 37. And so, I mean, surely that's just another example of learning to wait well. And I don't want to get too much more into David, because I think we've kind of run the end of our time. But learning the art of waiting well is about saying to the Lord, I will serve you while I'm waiting. I will worship while I'm waiting. I will not faint while I wait with you. And I hope and I pray that your journey of waiting with God will be hand in hand, and so that you will see the purposes of God fulfilled as you wait with him. And that is all I've got time for today. So may God bless you on your journey. I'm glad to be on this journey of transition with you, and I'm praying that this is helping you. And I look forward to being back with you again soon, because we've got a couple more episodes and we're going to land this well. So join me, and I'll see you soon. Okay, bye-bye.